Mr. Vice President, thank you very, very much for coming here. We're going to turn to climate change in just a moment, a subject that is quite serious. But I think before we get there, many people want to know about your life now as a private citizen. You've had this big smile on your face today. I know your son just got married, which brought a lot of joy to your family. But beyond that, you seem very, very happy today. Because tell us what you're up to.
Well, who wouldn't be happy to be interviewed by David Gergen at the... I mean... You may be misinterpreting the smile. No, thank you. I feel that it is a joy and a privilege to have work that justifies pouring every ounce of energy you've got into it. I spend most of my time trying to catalyze the emergence of solutions to the climate crisis. We'll talk about that in a moment, as you said. I travel a lot. I just got back from a training session in Australia.
Tell us about these training sessions. I was quite interested. You go all around the world training young environmental activists.
Not only young activists. There were 500 in Australia. This was the 5th training in Australia, but I do them in countries around the world with the Climate Reality Project, the NGO that I founded and chair. We do a lot of other things besides the training programs, but there were 32 countries represented in this training, and there were a couple of teenagers, there were a couple of people 80 years old. I think the median age was about 36. And it's a 3-day program that trains them to be effective communicators and activists, because the climate crisis really requires a bottoms-up grassroots demand for solutions, because elites in many parts of the world are under the influence of the old legacy industries that depend 85% on carbon-based fuels, and that's got to change. It will change, but it needs to change more quickly than it has been. But just to finish the answer to your first question, that's what takes most of my time. I also am enjoying the business world. Along with my friend David Blood, I co-founded Generation Investment Management.
You said you almost called it Blood and Gore?
That
was going to be the name?
I did. I did actually seriously want to call it Blood and Gore, but the other partners said, no, that's probably not the best thing to do. But I've really, it focuses on sustainable investing, and we're based in London and New York, and it's really been a joy to do well and do good at the same time, as the old cliche goes. I'm also proud to be a partner with Kleiner Perkins, Caulfield and Byers, the venture capital firm in Silicon Valley. Of course, John and Ann Dorr are very much a part of this Aspen community. My friend Kevin Wall is here also, who is my co-founder of Live Earth and another set of activities related to climate. So I've been keeping busy and enjoying life.
Well, an Oscar and a Nobel, and plus all these great enjoyments. You can't go too far wrong with that. But I was interested, just one more second on this, the sustainable investment. Many people think that if you invest in sort of good causes, you're probably going to lose a little money. But your sustainable investment firm has actually done extraordinarily well for 10 years.
Yeah, we have outperformed the market for 10 years with a unique model that fully integrates sustainability factors, not only environmental sustainability, but how firms treat their employees and the communities where they and their suppliers and subcontractors are active, the ethics in the executive suite, healthcare, et cetera. And we have found that when you integrate those factors fully and completely, not just by using a checklist approach, there are folks that do that and claim to do well, and more power to you. But when you fully integrate those factors in every step of the investing process, you get a more complete view of the companies and the market sectors in which they're operating. and you have a better chance of getting a better return for your clients.
Wow. How much do you have under management now, assets under management?
Well, we don't typically talk about that, but approximately 11 billion. It's a boutique firm in the field of global equities. We have
That's serious money.
also a climate solutions fund and sustainable bonds, or the global credit fund. We have a small China fund that's it's really important to understand the evolution of the markets in China. But we give 5% of our profits every year to the Generation Foundation that is focused on the promotion and development of sustainable capitalism, which is also completely congruent with the effort to solve the climate crisis. Our markets, of course, capitalism is the best form of organizing economic activity that's well understood globally. It allocates supply and demand and resources more efficiently. It's more congruent with higher levels of freedom. It's at the base of every successful economy. And perhaps most importantly, it unlocks a higher fraction of human potential with a system of organic, ubiquitous incentives that reward hard work and ingenuity and innovation. But it is increasingly associated in the minds of publics with more frequent, more serious market disruptions like the credit crisis and following a Great Recession that we're still trying to achieve escape velocity to get out of. And there have been too many of those in the last couple of decades. There is a plague of short-termism that now encourages and rewards people for focusing on time periods that are much shorter than what the organic process of investing is supposed to be all about. There's a misalignment of incentives. There's a failure to measure much of the value spectrum that is relevant to the survival of civilization. Negative externalities like global warming pollution, for example, are invisible in markets. That's insane. Positive externalities like the benefits from investing in public goods like education, mental health care, community services, et cetera. Those are also invisible in GDP and all of the accounting systems that are derivative. And there are other shortcomings that really are in need of reform, and we promote that on a regular basis.
Well, let's cut to the news, if
All right.
I might. You know, for some years now, you've been sort of seen as the nation's Jeremiah, the prophet Jeremiah, who forecasts the destruction and you've written a remarkable piece here in the last couple of weeks, which was published in Rolling Stone, which is like a totally different message. Now, let me just read. Pay attention to this. This is really interesting. Al Gore writing, "In the struggle to solve the climate crisis, it is now clear that we will ultimately prevail. There is surprising, even shocking good news." Tell us about the good news from Al Gore. Good news about the climate.
Well, there is good news, and I'm excited by it. Let me say that I've always believed that we would eventually solve the climate crisis. The question has been how much damage will be done during the period of procrastination and denial that is still ongoing. What is different now is that the speed with which widely distributed renewable energy generation has developed and become cheaper and more efficient has surprised most people. Maybe not everyone, but I'm in the group that was surprised by how fast it has come down in price. Here's a startling fact. Photovoltaic electricity is now equal to or cheaper than the grid average, the average price of electricity from all other sources in 79 countries. We are seeing a steady drop of 15 to 20% per year in the cost of photovoltaic electricity. It has now crossed that threshold point. And by the way, in markets, there's a pretty significant difference between more expensive than and cheaper than. It's not unlike the difference between 32 degrees Fahrenheit and 33 degrees Fahrenheit. It represents a difference between markets that are frozen up and markets that are liquid, with capital flowing fully toward investment opportunities that become more attractive year by year. Battery technology has also been coming down in price, not as quickly, but just as steadily, and now is right at the break-even point where people are going to choose to go off-grid. These developments, David, are so significant that the electric utility industry worldwide now regularly talks in their own meetings and open conferences about what they call the utility death spiral. It's not unlike what happened to the landline telephone businesses. They're really in disarray now because mobile phones are a widely distributed alternative.
So, you know, a lot of the conventional wisdom has been solar and power are nice, but they're going to be years, decades away. We're going to have to depend on fossil fuels the rest of our lives. But what you're saying is there's a revolution underway that is going to bring this on much faster than we expected. I was quite struck in your piece about Germany and how much progress they're making.
Yeah, one day last month, Germany got 76% of all of its electricity from wind and solar. Their average is now up to 37. That was an unusual day, but their average is up to 37. And by the way, they're pretty far north, and they have a lot of clouds, and their average will soon be up to 50%. And we're seeing this happen in places all over the world. And the conventional wisdom on photovoltaics, as you correctly described it, I believe it is typical of the way most of us are often fooled by exponential technology curves. If you look at the history of the deployment of photovoltaics, it advanced very slowly for a long time, and then the elbow of the curve started upwards, and then it just started zooming upwards. In Bangladesh, for example, there are now 2 new rooftop photovoltaic systems installed every minute, 24 hours a day. It's the fastest growing per capita market for photovoltaics. In East Africa and West Africa, it's poised for what most people are saying is going to be explosive growth. And let me give you an analogy that helps explain this for those of us who have been surprised. I remember when the first clunky mobile handset telephones came out. I like to be an early adopter. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I thought those things were so cool looking. Boy, you look at the pictures now, they look so silly. But I remember when those early models came out, AT&T did an international market survey and projected that they'd be able to sell 900,000 of them by the year 2000. Well, they were not only wrong, they were way wrong. They sold 109 million that year. Now there's 6.8 billion contracts, another 1.25 billion per year. So why were they way wrong? Four reasons quickly. They did not fully understand the implications of the exponential curve, and that the price down curve would be matched by an up curve in the quality, such that mobile phones are often supercomputers now, and in places like Africa, they're used for commerce way more than we use them in the US. Third, they didn't count on the fact that the purchasing decisions were being made by individuals, not centralized institutions like utilities. And fourth, they didn't calculate the impact of the absence of landline telephone grids in these developing countries. So those same 4 factors are present in the developing world and all around the world today. The new Prime Minister of India, Modi, just announced, he was just took office last week, that the 400 million Indians who have no electricity at all are all going to get it, this is his promise, by relying on photovoltaic electricity. And this is typical of what's happening in developing countries.
It's so striking. There's a little pamphlet that's floating around here at Aspen. You've probably seen it from Thomson Reuters with the 10 trends that they were predicting, and they predicted by 2025 the world's biggest source of energy would be solar. And
Yeah.
it was, and it's absolutely striking. But here's what.
And by the way, we get as much the fuel.
Yeah, tell us that.
The fuel.
Yeah.
This is an actual fact. The amount of energy the Earth receives from the sun every hour is equal to the amount of energy consumed by the entire world in a full year. So we're not going to run out of the fuel.
Okay. Help us understand.
And it's free.
Yeah. Help us understand what the forces are behind us. We can talk about the information age and talk about Silicon Valley, but how do we understand what's going on here in energy? Where is it happening? Is it happening in private commerce, R&D? Has the government had a lot to do with this? What's driving this?
The government has had a lot to do with it. The green stimulus program that President Obama included in his stimulus at the beginning of his first term has really helped a lot. And we have seen venture capital priming the pump for these technology development programs. And the globalization of the innovation marketplace also plays a big role. If you go back and look at what happened during the Industrial Revolution as an analogy, a lot of really exciting innovation took place in these clusters of expertise that were around specific communities and counties in England. Now you get virtual clusters of expertise on the internet and cross-fertilization of ideas and competitiveness in the entire global economy.
And
absolutely, because these markets are so enormous, people are chasing them relentlessly.
That's so interesting. But it's also about the individual participation in the process. You said the whole distribution system is going to change. There used to be a centralized, it currently is a centralized distribution system for electricity with utilities providing a lot of that power. But now it's becoming decentralized, with individuals having a lot to do with what they put on their own homes.
Yeah. Well, let me ask for a show of hands on a question that I think in some audiences will illustrate this, maybe not in this one, but how many people here personally or have children who no longer use landline telephones but rely totally on mobile phones? Pretty amazing. And that's the response I get in most audiences now. 10 to 15 years from now, there probably wouldn't be that high a percentage of hands, I would doubt it, but there would be a similar shock and surprise at the number of people who answer the question, who's gone to off-grid electricity? That trend is extremely powerful. Because now, and by the way, the electric utilities, some of them, not all of them, David Crane spoke here last week. NRG is an example of a utility that's really trying to get with this trend and find a way to profit from it. But a lot of them are desperately trying to hold it back by introducing laws to slow down things like net metering, where the electricity surpluses from photovoltaics can be sold back into the grid. In 34 states, this right-wing group, ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council, has introduced legislation and regulatory proposals with utility commissions to put a tax on people who put a solar panel on their roofs. In Atlanta, Georgia, the Atlanta Tea Party.
They penalize you if you put a solar panel.
That's correct. Right. And their argument is, you're a free rider. You're using the grid when you sell your surplus. Well, the surpluses come at a time of peak usage and help them avoid new construction of more coal plants or other fossil fuel plants. So the public interest is served, but the utilities require continued growth to drive profits and stock prices up. So it's a conflict between the private interest and the public interest. But here's the good news. They're not winning on this. In Atlanta, for example, the Atlanta Tea Party joined forces with the Sierra Club to form a new organization called, wait for it, the Green Tea Coalition. And they defeated that proposal. In Oklahoma, they asked for up to $150 per month per household for solar installations. Barry Goldwater Jr. Formed an organization called Tusk, Tell Utilities Solar Will Not Be Killed, and they defeated that proposal. They compromised on $5 per month, and now people are trying to defeat that. In Kansas, home of the Koch brothers, who are funding this more than any other group, you won't be surprised to hear, 91% of the people in Kansas said, they told a pollster a month ago, they strongly support solar and subsidies to encourage solar. And of course, the continuing subsidies for carbon-based fuel are 25 times larger than the subsidies for renewable energy.
Go over that one more time. How much, you're talking about globally?
Globally, yes.
Right. 25 times
and
more.
In the U.S., we have, depending on how you count the military expenses in the Persian Gulf, even without including that, we have about $7 billion a year in subsidies for coal, oil, and gas. And then there are other calculations that make it larger. In the developing countries, there are $550 billion per year to subsidize kerosene, charcoal, dirty diesel, dirty carbon fuels. And there's at least $1.5 trillion annually to subsidize production of carbon-based fuels. This, of course, is functionally insane. We're putting 98 million tons of global warming pollution into the thin shell of atmosphere surrounding the planet every day, as if it's an open sewer. And the cumulative amount of man-made global warming pollution now traps as much extra heat energy every day as would be released by 400,000 Hiroshima-class atomic bombs exploding every day. It's a big planet, but that's a lot of energy.
So your central argument is, look, there's good news. We have the potential here to really have a transformation, a real transition, but we ought to accelerate our path there because the real damage can be done in the meantime.
That is correct, and the optimism that I'm expressing is tempered by warnings from the American Association for the Advancement of Science, for example, the largest scientific society in the world, that we are nearing some tipping points that could make solutions more difficult. We just crossed one last month that's long been feared, and that is the irreversible collapse of West Antarctica, which means at least an extra 1 meter of sea level that's now irreversible. We've crossed another in northeastern Greenland. Now 100% of Greenland is destabilized. There are other tipping points, potentially the release of vast quantities of methane in the Arctic, but still there is this denial. And for example, in Florida, the #1 city in the world vulnerable to sea level rise by population is Calcutta, but the #1 city vulnerable measured by assets at risk is Miami. And in Miami today, there are streets in Miami Beach where, absent any rainfall whatsoever, a high tide comes in and people are walking with the water up over their ankles in the sidewalks and in the streets. And you have the governor and one of the senators there, straight up climate deniers. I just wonder, as they're sloshing through the water, are they saying, "Oh, I don't notice anything. Do you notice anything?" I mean, it's kind of ridiculous. And in Norfolk, Virginia, there was a story just a couple days ago about a realtor whose home was on the list for on the Outer Banks, where this was the Outer Banks, not Norfolk. Of course, the largest naval base in the world is in Norfolk. It's going to be underwater also, so we'll all have to pony up for that one. But this person, her home was vulnerable, and so she went to work and gathered others to force a retraction of the scientific study from the state. It's as if, we think that the laws of physics are subject to debate and amendment and political contributions can sway the writing of the laws of physics. We really have to come to grips with this as soon as we possibly can in order to avoid these other tipping points and in order to minimize the amount of damage programmed into the climate system.
We have so little time, but I do want to cover a couple more subjects. What policies do we need to put in place, in your judgment, to accelerate our transition?
We need to put a price on carbon in markets, and in order to do it, we need to put a price on denial in politics.
Okay.
We need to stop subsidizing the dirty fuels that create dirty weather.
Okay. Now, for the last 2 or 3 years, there have been a lot of conversation in the public press about the breakthroughs in fracking and the capacity to produce much more natural gas, and that is seen as the bridge to a renewable future. Where are you on that subject?
Well, some of the Bernstein research, for example, and some of the investment bank analyses have said that this cost-down curve in photovoltaics in particular is going to overtake gas as well as coal. And I think that's probably accurate, but a more important answer to the immediate question is that it's true gas has only 50% of the carbon compared to coal per BTU, 2/3 of that compared to oil, but each molecule of methane that leaks is 84 times as powerful in trapping heat over a 20-year time scale, and then the math gets complicated, but it's still much, much worse. And so even if a few percentages of it leak, then there's no climate advantage whatsoever. Now, the majors are doing a pretty good job of trapping it. The independents include many who are not. George Phineas Mitchell, who really invented hydraulic fracturing and horizontal drilling before his death, called forcefully for strict regulation of this source. The Obama administration apparently is considering such regulations, and I'm happy about that.
But a regulated industry is something you would support? A well-regulated industry?
Well, I mean, I think we'd have to see what the leakage is. But again, even if there was no leakage, it would still be 50% of what comes from coal. And we need reductions of not 50%, but 80 to 90%. And the sooner we start bending those emission curves down, the more likely it will be that we will prevail, and the less damage that we will have to face. I mean, look, this is not speculative. Let me give you a couple of quick examples. When Super Typhoon Haiyan came across the Pacific toward the Philippines 6-7 months ago, the waters of the Pacific over which it traveled were 3.5 degrees Celsius, 5 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than normal. So it became not only a strong typhoon, it became the strongest typhoon or ocean storm ever to make landfall. 4 million climate refugees, twice as many as the Indian Ocean tsunami. Today, there are still 2 million refugees. Similarly, when Hurricane Sandy came across the windward areas of the Atlantic toward New York and New Jersey, it was 9 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than normal in those areas.
That's why the storm was so big?
That's why it was so much stronger than it would have otherwise been, and of course the sea level was higher. And one of the things most cited by critics of my film a few years ago was an animated sequence that saw the 9/11 memorial site being flooded by the ocean. Well, that happened on September 29th, 2012, way sooner than was predicted. And again, how many of these events does it take before the denial gives way? Part of the problem is we have an anti-climate lobby spending a lot of money using the playbook that the tobacco industry innovated. Naomi Oreskes is the co-author of this book, The Merchants of Doubt, that documents this really fully. Some of the same people involved. The tobacco industry, after the Surgeon General's report, they hired actors and dressed them up as doctors and put them in front of cameras with scripts that said, "Hi, I'm a doctor. It's perfectly fine to smoke. You don't have to worry about any health consequences." And hundreds of millions of people continued dying. Same playbook, phony scientists, phony pseudo studies, and large campaign contributions and lobbyists and lobbying expenses to try to base policy on falsehood rather than on fact.
One other big policy decision that's coming up. The president went to Copenhagen on climate. Of course, that was a bust. But now we've got Paris coming up late next year for an international treaty. You seem optimistic we're going to get it this time.
Well, I think the president's courage in instructing his EPA to go forward with the regulation of CO2 emissions from existing ANPAS and new power plants is really important, not just because of the emissions reductions it will cause, but because it will give him the moral authority that he lacked in Copenhagen. The Chinese follow this very closely, and of course they now have their own so-called air apocalypse. Life expectancy in northern China has already gone down 5.5 years, even before the lung cancer epidemic kicks in. Xi Jinping is under enormous pressure
from his populace, from people.
From the people. He's in a struggle with the regional and provincial governments who are in cahoots with a lot of the carbon polluters historically. And he's put in place a cap and trade system in 5 cities and 2 provinces. He said it's a pilot for a nationwide cap and trade system. He's banned new coal burning in 3 of the major cities. He has also required reporting of all CO2 emissions from all major industries. The signs are that he is moving in the right direction. So I'm optimistic. In Berlin 2 weeks ago at the climate conference there, for the first time, there was active and productive cooperation between the U.S. and China. There's a special session of the UN on climate in the 3rd week in September, and then Paris in December 2015. I know people are leery of these global conferences, but you know, the great American poet Wallace Stevens once wrote, "After the last no comes a yes, and on that yes, the future world depends." There were lots of no's before the abolition of slavery got a yes, before women got the right to vote, before the civil rights movement succeeded here. This is a progressive reform on which the future world depends, on which the future of all human civilization depends.
So we come to Paris with a president with new authority. China, which is coming around, much better position than in Copenhagen. India under new prime minister, coming around, much better position. That gives you a lot of optimism. Tell me this, the final question to explore. Can you get a treaty passed in the United States Congress? Can you get it through the Senate if you do it? How do we break open the logjam in our national politics on the environment?
Well, you know, Hank Paulson and a bunch of other former secretaries of the Treasury, bipartisan group, just came out calling for it last week. There are a lot of Republicans who are now saying, hey, look, enough is enough. We've got to move on this. You know, I think at some point reality does settle in. But here's an important point, David, and it circles back to a point that we started with in this discussion. We need a treaty, we need a global treaty, and eventually we will get one. But the carbon-based industries are gonna have stranded assets regardless of whether there's a treaty or not. You know, the subprime mortgages given to people that didn't make down payments and couldn't make the monthly payments, as soon as people realize what the real value is, they collapse. That's what caused the credit crisis and the Great Recession. There are now $21 trillion in stranded carbon assets, dead men walking, and the stranding does not depend on a treaty. California has just passed its own legislation. So has Quebec, British Columbia, Ontario, a lot of regional governments elsewhere in the world. Europe has just upped its ante. India's just put a tax on coal. China, as I've said, is moving. So is India. NGOs and grassroots organizations are now mobilizing to require disinvestment from these assets that are vulnerable to being stranded. There are the technology developments so that the cost of competitive alternative sources is now really affecting the future of the fossil fuel economy on the margins. So that's all good news. We're gonna get there. The only question again is how much damage do we want to allow to take place for us and our children and grandchildren? And as I have often said, and I'll close with this because there are a lot of influential people in this audience. I knew that before, but when I went over the list of all 800 signed up for this, I thought, wow, this is an influential group. The day will come when the next generation will ask one of two questions. And if they live in a world where we've delayed so long that there are climate refugees like there were in Syria, contributing to the collapse of that society, where there are stronger storms and deeper droughts and cities retreating from the coast and failures of governance and chaos and real despair, they would be justified in asking of us in this generation, what were you thinking? Didn't you notice that 99.99% of all the scientists were in agreement, all the National Academies of Science, all of the professional scientific societies, and Mother Nature? Didn't you notice? But if they live in a world filled with a sense of renewal and hope, with renewable energy and a sustainable society with sustainable forestry and agriculture and efficiency, and they can look at their kids and feel hope that their lives will be better still, I want them to look back and ask of us, how'd you do it? How'd you find the moral courage to change so quickly? And I hope that part of the answer will be the Aspen Ideas Festival was a turning point. Thank you very much.